Star. George Freeman to move the motion.
Thank you, Mrs Hobhouse. It's a great pleasure to be here under your chairmanship this afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to raise the issue of inland flooding and how we help the Minister to help tackle this tsunami of inland flooding that is sweeping so much of this country, not just my beautiful constituency of Mid-Norfolk, but many other areas. And I think the presence of so many colleagues from all parties, all counties, or certainly many counties, speaks volumes about the scale of the problem. And Ms Hobbs, I want to start in the December of 2020, when I really fully woke up to the scale of what was coming. It was a lovely Christmas in Mid-Norfolk, and as with many colleagues in our part of the world, the phone started ringing. And I spent, along with many people, that week of Christmas bailing out constituents, clearing out sewage, helping to get Anglia Water to come and pump out houses. And it didn't just happen in one village, it happened in about 7 or 8 across Mid-Norfolk. And at that point I realised the scale of what was coming and why in the constituency letterbox this issue had been becoming increasingly prevalent. And following that, I set up the Mid-Norfolk Flood Partnership with the 14 villages that had been worst affected. And as a result of that, we set out 15 very practical things that we in Norfolk could do. And we set up with the County Council the Norfolk Flood Alliance. And then this year we held the first Norfolk Flood Summit. And I wanted to take this opportunity today just to update on some of that work and to flag some of the things that we've identified that we really hope the Minister, and I commend her for the grip that she's shown in gripping this problem in arriving in this office, and I think she's on the cusp of really having a chance to do something quite significant for generations to come. But I wanted to highlight the things that in Mid-Norfolk we are particularly suffering from, say something about what really the problem is in our part of the world, because it's different in different parts of the country, and to set out some suggestions for things that I hope the Minister in the flood review that she's leading will take on board. And to that end, I've arranged a flood summit, an all-party flood summit on June the 2nd with the 4 APPGs. It tells you something, Ms Hobhouse, when there are 4 APPGs set up standing room only in order to deal with flooding. And of the 400 new MPs or whatever have arrived in Parliament, I think 100 of them have put flooding very high on their list. So this is a big issue, I think. It's no longer a marginal issue. And I want to say something about the importance of gripping this at scale so that future generations don't have to experience the horrors that our constituents have, i.e. Put wind in the Minister's sails to do something that Whitehall often struggles with. Often, I know as a veteran minister myself, the sticking tape solution is often the easy one the tempting one to reach for. But this, as I think she knows, requires a structural change in the way we think about water across our economy. So Ms Hobhouse, Mid-Norfolk, the clue is in the name, it's not a maritime constituency. And I'm talking today about inland flooding. I appreciate there's a coastal flooding problem. One of the issues in Norfolk, actually, is we've had so much coastal flooding that the focus has been on that, not so much on the inland flooding. My constituency is largely made up of Breckland, the glacial clays and sands. Clue, it shouldn't be flooding. It's dry, very dry. And when you can have water and sand, you have very productive agricultural land. And yes, we have some lower-lying, very beautiful areas, the chalk streams, the Wensum Valley, the Yare, the Tudd, which are areas where you shouldn't be building, not least because they're sites of special scientific interest and hugely strong habitats and very beautiful, but they're also prone to flooding. So why is Mid-Norfolk flooding, is the question I hear you all asking. Because it shouldn't be flooding. Other areas should be, but not Mid-Norfolk. And there are several answers, but let me just first of all list out the scale of what's happened in the last 5 years. 22 of my villages have had serious flooding, by which I mean sewage washing between houses, and more than 5 houses affected at one time. So there are plenty of houses that live near a ditch or a river and get some flooding. I'm talking about, at scale, serious flooding with chronic consequences for the people affected. I'll give you an example. Attleborough Mill Lane is a culvert, terribly designed in the 70s. No one's taken responsibility for it. It's flooded every year for 10 years. The 4 houses at the entrance to the culvert have flooded every year for 10 years. Last autumn, 100 houses in Mill Lane flooded. Well, that's when people really start to wake up and understand. And this is happening. I'll happily give way.
important debate to the House. And as soon as I walked in, a colleague looked at me in astonishment and said, "Is there flooding in West Hampstead?" And I said, actually, there is, and it only takes a heavy rainstorm to have all the homes in my constituency filled with water and sewage. And the reason why I intervened at this point is because we have a middle lane as well in West Hampstead, which has been flooded. It's not quite the same one, but I feel the risk of surface water flooding hasn't been taken seriously. And I find it strange because properties in danger from surface water flooding outnumber those in danger from rivers and seas by 2 to 1. And I'm proud that our friends in City Hall are actually publishing their surface water strategy tomorrow. But I'd like the honourable member to address the fact that developers, I feel, also have a role to play in managing surface water flooding. And I'm sure he's going to address that, but I wanted him to know that there are others in this room who also agree with him about the role of developers.
Well, the honourable lady makes a brilliant point, and at the risk of opening the floodgate of interventions too early, I absolutely will come to that point at pace so that members across the House can pile in. I just want to, because the poor... yes, I'll give way to my great and honourable friend.
Can I commend the honourable gentleman for bringing this forward? He's absolutely right. One of the problems, if I can put forward the reasoning behind what the honourable gentleman is referring to, it's not just in Mid-Norfolk, it's right across this great whole United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's the old system of building houses. The storm drain and the sewage went into the one system. That's the way they did it 40, 50 years ago. And the houses that we grew up round about, that creates a problem. Every time you get heavy rain, and rain doesn't come lightly anymore, it comes in storms like hurricanes, and it brings a deluge of water. But the system isn't able to cope with that. So does the honourable gentleman and his solutions in moving forward? It's not just about new developments, it's about the old developments and the old houses and the way that it was okay years ago, but it's not okay today.
Friend, I'm tempted to say my great honourable friend, we've spoken in this hall together so many times, he's absolutely right. And of course Mid-Norfolk has my constituency now has 130 villages, 3 towns. I lost at the last boundary review Wyndham. Why? Because the rest of my patch has had 10,000 new houses built in the last 10 or 15 years. No constituency, I think, I beg, possibly the honourable member of South West, but very few have had as many houses as I have, and that is part of it. But of course what's happening is developers are tending to build on the outskirts of villages and towns. It's the easy place to dump commuter housing and not upgrading the drains. And so little villages that have happily existed and been able to drain themselves for years and cope with some growth are now finding huge problems with the existing drainage infrastructure not being able to cope, which leads to the sewerage. Yes, I have to give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way and congratulate him on securing this debate. On the point of new developments, I wonder whether or not he agrees with the Liberal Democrats that making the water companies statutory consultees in the planning process would mean that developers can't build where the infrastructure isn't able to account for the new houses.
Yes, it's a very good point. I do agree. I'm going to go a lot further than that if members will allow me to get to the radical central elements of my bill. But yes, I do agree that that is absolutely something we need to do. So across Mid-Norfolk, the 23 villages, I'm not going to list them all, but it goes from Old Buckenham in the deep south-east through Wretham, Hockham, Rocklands, Thompson, Watton, Tony, Cranbrook, a cluster of villages that are co-adjacent. North Elmham, Billingford, Ling, Elsing, Yaxham, Mattershall, right up to Weasenham, which should not be flooding up in my northwest frontier. And what that tells you is this is not actually just geomorphological. This is as a result of housing and a result of lack of investment in the drainage infrastructure. And the truth is, the very patient people in Mid-Norfolk, they're pretty patient, they've had me as their MP for 14 years, are getting really impatient about this because the contract of the state, the contract of the citizen, you pay your taxes, you buy a house, you don't these days expect that much, but you do expect that your house won't flood because of systemic and structural failures of national infrastructure. And when it does and you ring, you hope somebody's going to come and pump it out, and you expect the water companies, you're paying very high bills, to be there and to help. And the service hasn't been there. It just hasn't been, the responsiveness hasn't been there until you're able to sit on the answering machine and ring enough times that eventually a tanker arrives. And so people are fed up, and they're fed up with that, and they're fed up with the fact that this has been coming for quite a long time, and they're very excited by the fact that the Minister is gripping it. So let me just spin through what the problems, it seems to me, are as I've experienced it in Norfolk. Of course, it's climate change, and let's not undermine the importance of that. We had last year the 8 wettest months on record, one after another, and that isn't happening for any sort of weird, strange, unexplained reason. It's climate change. It is happening. But it's also that, in my part of the world, we're building a lot of houses, and the country's got to build them. So I don't think not building houses is the answer. It's also, and the devil is, of course, in the detail, it's that our agricultural practices have changed. In my part of the world, a proud farming county, we now have a lot of contract farming. Big land owners, often pension funds or remote. The farming isn't done by the local landowner, it's done by contract farmers on a very tight, low-margin contract, huge bits of kit, roaring around trying to get the job done and scratch a living. So the old days, I grew up on a farm where in a rainy day, a rainy month, you go mend the fences and clear the ditches. That work doesn't tend to be in the contract farming contracts today. So there's a basic maintenance problem. Our county councils have seen their budgets hammered by the rising cost of social care and some of the austerity 1.0. So there's a problem with maintenance. Then we've got a big planning problem. And the reason I think the point just made by the honourable gentleman is a good one. But the real problem in my patch has been that because of the 5-year land supply, good planners have sat down and said, well, we don't want to build here and we shouldn't build there, and statutory consultations. And then many of the big developers have land banked, so they've taken their permissions down where they know they're going to get them, haven't built them out, and then invoked the 5-year land supply, which is a very sensible coalition policy designed to make sure that you couldn't have a 20-year plan and then ignore it. They've used that 5-year land supply to blow the whistle and say, well, you're not building out at your 5-year land supply, so we'll now invoke the freedom to dump where we want. It's a win-win. So they then dump 100 houses outside Yaxham, 200 outside Matchell. Of course they want to go near Norwich and dump on the outskirts of the village near a road and move on and not invest. And that is what has driven a lot of the problem. So statutory consultation is fine, but this is also a planning issue. And part of what my bill addresses is I think we have got to somehow make sure that developers, when they're building like that, it's not just that they're statutory consulted and they go through the tick boxes. I think the only way to make the developers really take this seriously is to say, look, if you build and within 5-10 years of your building there is significant flooding that didn't used to happen in that area before, you're going to be on the hook for upgrading the drains. You're going to be on the hook for doing the repair work. To create a fiduciary financial liability that the directors of those companies will say, well, I think we'd better upgrade, we better do the investment up front, rather than rely on consultations. Because I think in the end, unless somebody is going to pay for this, and to be fair, the water companies have got to pay more, but we're also asking them to pay billions to improve pipes, billions to build reservoirs, billions to stop leaks. So somewhere in this system, we have to find a bit more money to do the upgrade of the traditional drains and improving the infrastructure. And I think it behoves us all to give the Minister some solutions. Where's the money going to come from? Nobody in Mid-Norfolk wants to pay more tax. They don't want to pay more council tax. It's already very high going on social care. So where's the money going to come from? And so I think one answer is from the developers. But there's also another problem. In Mid-Norfolk, when you pick up the phone, who's in charge, you ask? Well, there are 36 organisations in Norfolk with responsibility for flooding prevention. I know in Whitehall that probably seems a low number, but in Norfolk people kind of want one. And we do have one. It's called the Local Flood Authority, the LFA. It's great, but they have no money and no power. The good news is, in addition to them, we have the IDBs, the Internal Drainage Boards, who've been looking after flooding since about 1550. They really know their ditches, their dikes, and colleagues I can see nodding with agricultural constituencies know that these are the very local experts who know about hydrology and water, and they know how it works. And the problem is they've had their budgets either cut or not maintained at the pace at which the demand that's hitting them. And of course, there are quite small number of areas, I think it's 15 to 20 districts, particularly in the east of England, the Fens, Cambridgeshire and Norfolk. There are other areas that have a very high incident of flooding. And the areas where they're being hit, the IDBs are having to be propped up by the district councils, which means the residents of those areas are then being penalised by funding being quite properly diverted into flooding, but that's funding that they're not getting into their public services. So there's a huge problem with the allocation of funding. Meanwhile, I notice the Environment Agency, I'll give way happily to my neighbour.
I'm very pleased my council colleague gave way. Thank you very much. I just wanted to touch upon internal drainage boards, and I'm very pleased that you mentioned that. Kings Lynn and West Norfolk Borough Council in my constituency, for every £1 they collect in council tax, 43p now goes to internal drainage board levies. It's completely unsustainable. So I wonder if the bill that the honourable member talks about addresses IDB levies and calls for a permanent, full-time solution to this funding issue.
Well, I'm grateful to my neighbour and good friend, the honourable member for South West Norfolk. Yes, it absolutely does, and I will take his steer to get to the point of the guts of my bill. He's absolutely right, and in our part of the world, the IDBs are crucial. And when I looked into all this, Minister, thinking, how come Norfolk is top of the league table of flooding? Well, I discovered, even more shockingly, is we're not. I think we're counting number 6 or 7 out of 10, which is why there are so many colleagues from other counties. So, I want to suggest that the problem really is fourfold, and that is what my bill in draft, and I'm keen to use today as an opportunity to polish those provisions. We have 4 provisions in the bill. Provision 1 is around responsibilities. And it seems to me that we need to have a much clearer, sharper set of responsibilities at the top. The Environment Agency obviously have overall responsibility for flooding in the country, but this is a local problem, and locally we've got to properly empower the local the strategic flood authorities, and we have to re-empower the IDBs. And at the moment, many of them are finding that in order to deal with flooding, they're coming up against all sorts of environmental green tape produced by the very agencies that are there to stop flooding. So many of our drains and ditches have now, it looks as though the Environment Agency are more interested in filling them with mud and wildflowers than actually encouraging them to be the places that drain the water. So people are getting frustrated with a sort of well-intended green bureaucracy that is getting in the way of local solutions. So responsibilities put back locally. Secondly, funding. And I strongly believe that we should be top-slicing and ring-fencing some of the funding for the Environment Agency to give it to the IDBs and to the strategic flood authorities. It would be a rounding error on the Environment Agencies. Yes, Ms. Hobhouse.
Sorry to come to an end because it's a very short debate for many members want to come in.
Do we have 90 minutes?
We have an hour. 60 minutes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought we had 90. I'm so sorry. Yes, so secondly, funding, and we've got to put the funding in the hands of the people who have the responsibility. Thirdly, planning liabilities, and I want to create liabilities on development companies so that they have an incentive, proper incentive, not just a vague instruction, incentive to upgrade the drainage facilities. I will happily give way.
Because actually earlier today I actually met with Thames Water and the SES Water representatives to discuss this actual very issue, and they all actually agreed that as professional consultees, their contributions are absolutely not given the same weight as statutory consultees. And I know my honourable friends already mentioned this, but they definitely will give some thought to actually being consultees as a minimum just for medium to large developments. Does my honourable member agree with this?
Yes, I think she makes a really important point, and I think this is all part of the planning mix. We have got to get this right. And my last point is on data, Ms. Hobhouse. It is very striking that when you have an area that floods like this, you reach for data. How bad is it? How much worse is it than it used to be? There isn't a properly collected data set. I have a map of all the dots of flooding in my patch and in Norfolk, but it seems to me now it wouldn't be that difficult to have a properly connected national flood heat map at the Cabinet Office so we can see where this is coming. And if it's coming this much more quickly in mid-Norfolk, and I suspect many other areas, the Cabinet Office need to be aware this is a national critical infrastructure resilience issue that's growing. And locally, we need flood maps so we can see where it's likely to flood this winter and to prepare. And although I know, as the former Minister for the Met Office, they have amazing data, and they can now predict that in certain areas of geomorphology, when it rains at this extent over in the west, the surge will hit. We can now predict with AI and these tools, but it's not properly being done. And I think there's a lot more we could do, Ms. Hobhouse, on data. I'm conscious, forgive me, I thought it was a 90-minute debate, so I'm conscious of time and how many colleagues. I will close at that point, Ms. Hobhouse, and look forward to the comments of my colleagues from all parties.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in this debate. I wish to call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson at 17:08, so people can make the math. I'm imposing a 2.5-minute speech limit immediately. And I call Navendu Mishra.
Thank you. And I congratulate the honourable gentleman on securing this important debate. I'm very limited by time, so I just want to raise the case of recent flooding at Meadow Mill in my constituency on New Year's Day. And I want to start by thanking the firefighters, the police officers, the council staff for supporting residents. Thankfully, none of the flats in the mill were flooded, but electricity and water supply was lost. And one of the key points I want to raise today in the limited time I have is that we need more funding for Environment Agency in terms of flood defences in Stockport. I've had several residents who have contacted me, several who have come to see me, and just a couple of examples. One of the residents I met She told me that the repair costs for a car due to flooding were approximately £320. We also had another resident who told us that because of temporary accommodation cost, they had to pay over £1,000 for that, and that really does add up. The Meadow Mill Residents Association have been doing a lot of work on this, and Martin Dock, the MBE, has been contacting utility companies in terms of supporting residents over electricity charges, which seem to be inconsistent. I think Stockport Council is making the representation. It is a Liberal Democrat-run council, I must point out, but I've been working with them, and they've been making representation to Environment Agency and the government about more funding that they need in order to support residents. The final point I will make is in terms of insurance costs. Many residents, either if they're tenants or if they own the property, they will face a much significantly higher insurance cost because of flooding, and I think this is an experience that will be replicated across constituencies, across MPs in this chamber, and I think something needs to be done in terms of flooding that is not caused by residents, but they're having to face much higher costs in terms of insurance, in terms of having to protect themselves. I'll just finish on the point that I have also met Environment Agency recently, and I want to thank all their staff, but I don't think they have a plan for increasing flood defences, particularly in my constituency of Stockport. So I'd urge the Minister, who I know is very hard-working and diligent, to make some representation on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to thank the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk for securing today's wide-ranging debate, and so it's quite hard not to get stuck on flooding, developer responsibilities and planning, but I will try and focus on just two key points in the very short time that I have. And my criticisms of the planning system are well recorded on Hansard, as is my support for the Liberal Democrat amendment to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill to make water companies statutory consultees, which I think we need to see happen. My constituents in Chichester know how fortunate we are to live in such a beautiful part of the UK. But we are seeing sites identified as being at risk of flooding still being approved for development if they are classified as strategic development sites in local plans that were written based on an outdated flood risk methodology. That is deeply concerning for my communities that are watching these fields flood year on year and then seeing houses built on those very fields. The situation was worsened by historical planning failures. The previous administration at Chichester District Council allowed the local plan to expire, which left developers to ride roughshod over areas like the Manhood Peninsula. That is a fragile, low-lying coastal region, increasingly vulnerable to extreme flooding. And climate change is exacerbating the already serious flood and erosion risks on the English coast. The Committee on Climate Change said back in 2018, the current approach to coastal management in England is unsustainable in the face of climate change. And the flood risk modelling fails to reflect the lived experience of many of my constituents. The Manhood Peninsula has already seen numerous floods since 2012, displacing families from their home and causing widespread fear that does not go away once the water has receded. I'd just very quickly like to talk about coastal squeeze. For Chichester Harbour, Natural England estimates that 58% of the salt marsh habitat has been lost since 1946, and we are losing around 3 football pitches worth of salt marsh every year. To address those concerns, I tabled an amendment to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill which seeks to make national landscapes, like the one responsible for Chichester Harbour, statutory consultees in the planning process. And I hope that colleagues across the House on the Bill Committee will support it, because places like Chichester Harbour are crying out for just a seat at the table to be able to relay their concerns in the planning process for areas of significant scientific importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I also thank the honourable gentleman for Mid-Norfolk for securing this important debate. As the member for Shrewsbury, flooding is always a priority for me, my residents, businesses and local services, as our historic town is encircled by the beautiful yet powerful River Severn. Some of my residents have been flooded over 20 times since 1998, and our active Shrewsbury Business Flood Action Group are providing valuable support for them who often struggle to find affordable insurance to cope. But in terms of funding, I would like to thank DEFRA for investing over £16 million this financial year into projects that protect communities like mine all along the catchment of the River Severn. As the newly elected chair of the River Severn Partnership, we are delighted to see a suite of demonstrator projects that will develop nature-based solutions upstream for longer-term resilience. And DEFRA are demonstrating their understanding and commitment to the scale of this issue, and they are rising to the challenge. In terms of data sets, which I know the Honourable Gentleman is very concerned about, DEFRA has already this January published new online data on the government website, which show that updated risk of flood from the combined sources of rivers, seas and surface water. So for the first time, surface water flooding is incorporated into that new national flood risk assessment. And this will help individual residents and businesses, whether the risk is coming downstream or up through their drain gullies, or sometimes from both. DEFRA have then incorporated this data set of March of this year to update the flood zone planning maps that are often used by our local authority planning developers and planning officers. So we've now got accurate risk assessments for all development sites, something that I know environmental campaigners are really keen to hear. Finally, we have a government that understands we need to stop building on areas at risk of flooding, and we have delivered the data, the mapping and the intelligence to inform those local decisions to uphold our important approach. And finally, in terms of local agencies and their responsibilities, I'm pleased to inform the Honourable Member that through the Environment Audit Committee, I've secured an inquiry that examines flood preparedness and response, and particularly looks at the fragmentation of responsibilities across so many agencies. What impact does this have on budget and how we can best coordinate? I'm hoping we can provide some helpful recommendations to the Minister, maybe for some efficiencies about how we can work better together towards prevention rather than cure. A bit like the demonstrator projects along the River Severn. Once again, Shrewsbury leading the way.
In North Norfolk, like much of the country, we've been told by government that we need to identify significantly more sites for housing. And let me be absolutely clear, we do need more homes, homes that local people can actually afford, so they're not stuck waiting endlessly on housing lists or left in temporary accommodation. But rushing to build homes without proper provision for flood alleviation or sustainable drainage would be a bad idea and incredibly costly. Imagine a young couple, after years of saving and planning, finally moving into their first home, and it floods because corners were cut, because developers weren't held to account. That's not just a policy failure, it's a failure of basic fairness. And it doesn't just affect new homeowners either. Add more pressure to our creaking infrastructure without investment, new risk, backed up drains and flooding for the people who've lived in these communities for years. The previous government promised to implement Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act, requiring developers to include sustainable drainage schemes, but never delivered. One place I know would benefit hugely from this is Ludham, a development of 12 houses, which, following the government's new mandated targets, has grown to 60, is causing significant concern for locals due to the history of flooding in the area. If it were to go ahead, it could only be feasible with real action on the surface water and drainage issues that the area faces. Whilst North Norfolk District Council does an excellent job in pushing developers as hard as they can, they need the government to provide them with the legislative teeth to achieve more. I hope the Minister is in conversation with her counterparts at MHCLG about how we make sure there's joined up thinking about flooding and the future planning legislation. I will.
I thank you for giving way. In my constituency of Tunbridge Wells, Hawkhurst Parish Council and Southern Water recently came to see me to complain about a number of developers who had mixed surface runoff water with foul water, which is actually illegal at the moment. And does he agree with me that if it's proven that developers have built big housing developments, which of course we need, but they have illegally mixed surface water and foul water, that they should be made to go and make good what they did?
Unquestioningly, slightly more sympathetic approach should be taken for historic householders who may not even realise their properties' surface water drains are connected to foul water systems, but for new developments since that law, absolutely unquestioningly. Finally, we must consider seriously the impact of man-made climate change on flooding. When we place responsibilities on developers, we must make sure that new developments don't just deal with the floods of the past or of today, but of the worst floods which are yet to come. Henry Cater, now chair of the Norfolk Strategic Flooding Alliance, which my honourable neighbour mentioned, and a voice given deserved reverence in Norfolk when speaking about these issues, has said that climate change will be creating a new level of extremes. We have to be ready for these. Simply planning for the current levels is going to be wasted in years to come. I look forward to working with colleagues across the House on this issue. It's something that needs proper cross-functional work from the government if we're going to ensure that the much-needed homes of tomorrow are built sustainably and the communities that they serve and join see their circumstances protected and improved.
Well, I have to reduce the speaking time to 2 minutes now. If you take intervention, it eats into the time who are on the list here. So I remind you on that one. 2 minutes, Mark Rodder.
Thank you, Mr. Hobhouse. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and may I also thank the member for Mid-Norfolk for his excellent work in securing today's debate. I wanted to speak briefly about the experience of residents in my Reading constituency, both in terms of the nature of flooding locally and also some of the possible solutions, and indeed to endorse the work that you're trying to do to bring local landowners and others together, and to support the work the Minister's obviously doing in this matter as well. We have 2 or possibly 3 issues with flooding in our area. 2 major rivers, both the Thames and the Kennet, both of which have other smaller streams and brooks running into them. But we also have a problem with some surface water flooding as well. And I have a great deal of sympathy for my colleague from London who mentioned that earlier. And of course, this can be absolutely appalling, as members earlier have mentioned, in that residents can find the most appalling disruption to their lives where homes are wrecked, muddy, water often polluted by sewage is inside their houses. It may take months or even more than a year to dry out the home and clean it properly, which is the most awful situation for any family. And I've heard stories of people both having water coming in at odd times of day and night, being woken up in the middle of the night by flood alarms, having water coming up under the floorboards in older houses where there's a void under a Victorian house, and all of this is truly awful. In terms of the issues that have been raised with me recently, I would like to just flag up that in a recent public meeting in Southcote, serious concerns were raised about a lack of joined-up communication between some of the major landowners, particularly private landowners in the Kennet Meadows area to the neighbouring Southcote community in Reading, where some of the owners are not active in clearing ditches and other watercourses. They're not active in clearing branches which have fallen into the Holy Brook, which is a river or a channel which comes back into the Kennet. And this does need much more attention. I would like to see more joined-up working. And just finally to thank neighbouring MPs, in particular my colleague for Reading West and Mid Berkshire, for her work on this matter as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hobhouse. It's a pleasure to serve on your chairmanship. I thank my great friend, the member for Mid-Norfolk, for securing this important debate. I wish to speak today about the effect this has had on my residents in South West Hertfordshire. In the 5.5 years that I've been a Member of Parliament, it's distressing how many of my residents come to me with what starts off as a trickle, but very quickly becomes quite a large and massive impact on their lives. Flooding is a real lived effect now. It's not just a remote risk. My residents have home damage, traffic disruption, economic loss, and actually increasingly more so mental health impact. Within Rickmansworth, we've got Batworth Canal and its surrounding waterways. Rickmansworth lies at the confluence of 3 rivers, the River Colne, River Chess and River Gade. It is a historic canal network which includes the Grand Union Canal and Batworth canals. But we are increasingly seeing overtopping of canals in recent years, fast rising water table during heavy rainfall, problem hotspots like Church Street and Aquadrome and Eby Road in Rickmansworth. Surface water flooding worsened by urban development, inadequate historic infrastructure and bad planning, which unfortunately we don't have an up-to-date local plan, so design guides are not being necessarily adhered to yet by developers because there's no requirement to do so. Planning must begin with flood resilience. Bad planning not just affects us currently, but some of the structures we build today will literally last decades, if not 100 years. So if we do it wrong now, it's very difficult to retrofit and correct with the developer who typically does make the profit and leave.
Would my honourable friend give way? I thank my honourable friend for giving way. In places like Malden in mid-Bedfordshire, too often we see inappropriate or poorly maintained sustainable drainage contributing to worsening flooding. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the government's plans for 1.5 million homes can only be considered a success if they're able to tackle problems like these so everyone is able to live in a dry home?
I 100% agree with my honourable friend. Just in closing, I think, can I commend my parish councillors, the volunteer flood wardens, the residents in Croxley Green, Rickmansworth and Batchworth that do step up during these difficult times. Flooding is now a structural challenge, not an anomaly. We must act now by embedding resilience in planning, enforcing developer responsibilities and investing in essential infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just have two very quick points that I would like to make. When I was first elected to Norfolk County Council back in 2013, social care was about 40% of the total budget. When I left 12 years later, just a few months ago, it was more like 60%, rapidly increasing to 70%. That's less money for maintenance. The highways maintenance backlog in Norfolk is something like £70 million. That's drains, that's gullies, that's ditches, that's dikes, and frankly, far too many flooding incidents are preventable. So I would strongly urge the Minister, with the great work that she is doing, this is a cross-departmental solution, and local council funding is absolutely crucial. Also in relation to internal drainage boards, there's an operational aspect which I referred to earlier, but we cannot underestimate the role that they play. They are very cost efficient, they are incredibly experienced, and they know their areas. When I visit IDBs in my patch, and there are dozens frankly, 10, 20, 30 years experience of the staff working there. Their costs are increasing mainly because of electricity. Frankly, it's expensive when the pumps are on to make them run. But more importantly, the pumps that are there are old. Frankly, walking into some of these pumping stations is like walking into a museum. They are 50 years old, and I think there's a huge risk here of failure when, at the very time that we need them because of increased rainfall, increased flooding incidents, we need those pumps to be working. So I strongly urge the Minister to look at capital funding for those IDB pumps, because frankly, when IDBs are gone, it's only then that we might realise how crucial they are and what critical infrastructure they play, albeit in a relatively small number of areas. But in those areas, they are absolutely critical pieces of infrastructure. Thank you.
With you in the chair, and I commend the honourable gentleman for Mid Norfolk for making an excellent speech. In the short time I have a number of points to make, so here goes. I want to agree with him that the response when people are flooded either by surface or river water is often chaotic. So, for example, in Gabowen, in my constituency, it's not clear who's going to close the road off, so then vehicles drive through, there's a big bow wave, and the flooding in those shops and homes becomes much worse. So I fully endorse his point about better coordination of response for people who've been flooded. I want to bring up the point of insurance, because insurance is hard to get. Homes built since 2009 aren't covered by Flood Re's remit, and its remit ends in 2030, leaving people stuck in potentially unsellable, unmortgageable homes. And I know the Minister's looking at Flood Re and its remit, but I'd be grateful if she could give us a bit of an update on that. I should have declared at the start that I'm the chair of the Flooded Communities APPG, so I do have an interest in this. After people have been flooded, it's often hard to get help. The frequently flooded criteria don't catch all those homes in rural communities because the density isn't there. I know she's looking at that, and I would be grateful if she could give us an update on that as well. Farms are hit really badly, and they are storing an enormous amount of water upstream. So will she be working with her colleagues in the department to look at how the sustainable farming incentive and other similar types of plan might be used to help people store water upstream and prevent flooding downstream? And finally, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, it's not really taking the opportunity to deal with this once-in-a-generation moment and opportunity to deal with the increased likelihood of flooding. So we've talked about statutory consultees in planning from as the water companies, implementing Schedule 3 so that SUDs are properly have statutory guidance and are properly maintained, and finally that houses aren't built in places that are inappropriate. The current guidelines don't achieve those objectives, and I think she should be hopefully working with her colleagues to make those requirements statutory. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mrs Hobhouse. In the village of Playhatch, my constituent Suzanne wakes up most days to flooding on her doorstep. Afraid they will touch sewage, she carries her children in Wellington boots to the bus stop. The area shouldn't flood, and she was reassured of this point from the previous occupiers of the property. The cause in this case is not increased rainfall, but development. And development is not supposed to put additional burdens on the drainage system, yet all too often the lived experience of residents is different to what's put into the plans. Local knowledge is insufficiently valued. When this is the case, can we expect anything less from our residents than dogged resistance to new housing? Therefore, I welcome new Clause 7 to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Taunton and Wellington. It requires the Secretary of State to bring into force a sustainable develop sustainable drainage provisions of the Flood and Water Management Act. This is an important step in requiring flood risk to be taken into account ex ante. Ex post, my new clause 89 will require developers to assess the real-world impact of development 5 years after completion. Where a review recommends that action be taken to improve development's drainage performance, the developer must implement such recommendations. I would therefore urge all members here to review my amendment and sponsor it that will give residents the security over the future of their homes where development is taking place.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Absolute genuine pleasure to serve under you in the chair, an honour indeed, and indeed to follow some wonderful speeches, all wonderful speeches in this very important debate. But in particular, say a massive thank you to the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk, who introduced the debate and did so with great style and great knowledge, as he always does. I'm going to say, with possible competition for my honourable friend from Carlisle, that I represent the wettest place, certainly in this chamber, and I'm certainly in England. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, contest the space.
Well, I mean, Carlisle floods, as my honourable friend knows all too well, but it's not beyond the wit of responsible developers to actually build in a way that reduces the trauma of flooding. And I have an excellent example in Carlisle, where Storey Homes built townhouses where the garages underneath are designed to actually be flooded, but protecting the residents from flooding. Does he agree with me that actually we need to do more to encourage developers to be more responsible and innovative in their design?
100% correct. And it's interesting, if you look at some of the older properties in my constituencies, they're the ones that are resilient. If they were built hundreds of years ago in many cases to resist flooding and to just flood sometimes, for it not to be the end of the world. And so absolutely the design of the new buildings in Carlisle absolutely measure up, and we should do more of that. I'm happy to give way. Yeah.
I slightly contest my honourable friend's suggestion that he may represent the wettest part of the country. Somerset is always at the forefront of flooding, and indeed part of my constituency, Glastonbury and Somerton, it lies in the Levels and Moors SSSI area. The area is increasingly threatened by inappropriate planning applications. Locally elected officials are crucial in good decision making for local communities. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the important role that they play to make sure the right decisions are made for local communities and our environment?
I thank my honourable friend. I appear to have opened up a... Indeed, I shall take no more interventions in that case. Yes, I appear to have opened up a very soggy kind of worms. But yeah, she's absolutely correct. And so just moving on to the point I want to make in my few moments, I think looking at the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and then this government and the previous government's attitude towards planning, it seems to be seeking to centralise control of planning on a national level, and yet relax planning rules on a local level to give local planners and local councillors and national parks and so on less power than they currently have, and that is very dangerous. In the Levelling Up Bill committee in the last Parliament, I served on that very lengthy bill, and amongst the things we proposed was what we refer to as the Infrastructure First Amendment, the idea that local authorities and national parks would have the power to be able to say no to developments unless the infrastructure was there in advance, and that includes drainage and correct sewage provision and sufficient capacity. I think that is so important, and we see that missing today. Again, just reflecting on the housing crisis, many members from all sides have talked about it. There is a severe housing crisis, 7,000 people in my district on the council house waiting list. We need to build, and yet we know that there's 1 million properties in this country with planning permission. So it's not that the rules are too tough, it is that the developers are not building, and we need to make sure that we point the finger of responsibility in the right place. On the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, we've talked about my honourable friend, the member for Taunton and Wellington, who has proposed, amongst the amendments to that bill, new clause 7, to bring into force the sustainable drainage provisions of the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. Can I shamefully admit to you, Mrs Hobhouse, that I was the Liberal Democrat DEFRA spokesperson on that bill 15 flipping years ago, because I've been the DEFRA spokesperson developers and under every leader since Nick Clegg, including myself, because there was only 8 of us and someone had to do it. But nevertheless, so I remember it very well. What a tragedy, what an outrage that 15 years on and that Schedule 3 has not been put into place. So we aim to ensure that we do that. I am mindful of time, so I want to say this is a really timely debate. I wrote last week to the Minister's right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, on the deeply concerning issue of flood defence spending. The Chancellor of the Exchequer said in her autumn, in the budget, that there would be a review after the 25-26 financial year. Well, we're getting very close. We're into that financial year now, and that is deeply, deeply troubling. So my communities in Cumbria were massively affected by Storm Desmond nearly 10 years ago. The cost of that flooding incident was £500 million. I'm watching the clock. And so I would just simply say this: to cut flood defence spending, to have shortcuts in development that allows flooding to happen, are catastrophic false economies. And so I will conclude. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Hobhouse, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Mid-Norfolk, for securing a really important debate. I don't think there is any better champion on this issue in Parliament who is bringing together many APPGs on this issue to specifically, from a cross-party basis, tackle and bring to the Minister's attention the very important issue of flooding, and setting up his own flood caucus, not only amongst parliamentary colleagues, but also dealing with this very prominently within the county of Norfolk as well, is incredibly invaluable. And I know that from his reference to 22 villages being flooded in his own constituency, and all of us across the House have referenced our own communities that are being impacted, just how important this issue is. And I want to address some of my remarks by echoing some of the concerns that have been raised in this debate, because flooding devastates communities, it devastates families, and has already been indicated it devastates the health and well-being of many of those constituents of ours that do go through that trauma of being flooded. It also devastates our farmers, it hits our economy at all levels, and it does also represent a threat to life. And what's worse for some, it can be not only a one-off event, it can be a frequent occurrence, and far too many people are impacted by it. And I was proud to say that under the previous government we did take robust action on flooding, and since 2010 over 600,000 properties had been better protected by government-backed schemes, and over 900,000 acres of farmland had been better protected. And in 2020 the government announced a doubling of the flood defence budget, including 100 million for frequently flooded allowance. But as has been indicated by many in this room, and an acknowledgement of course from these benches, there is always more to do. And while statistics represent vital progress, we must recognise, as has been indicated, that there is always much more to do. And I want to just go through and canter through some of the points that have been made, because it is quite right that when you're dealing with water and you're dealing with flooding, a catchment approach is always focused on. And that deals with not only our farmers, but deals with our housing developers and our infrastructure providers as well. And it starts right at the top, upstream, dealing with our moorland restoration projects, and dealing with ensuring that our farmers have the environmental funding support to deal with environmental mitigation, which is why it's deeply frustrating that the government has stopped FSI applications, whilst there's an acknowledgement that they've opened it up to an additional 3,000 applications from the back of our calls on this side of the House. It is nevertheless worrying to many in our farming community, and that is exacerbated by issues like the family farm tax, with creating uncertainty amongst our agricultural sector. But the role of developers has been mentioned by all in this room, and I agree that we need to have the ability for water companies to be statutory consultees as part of that process. I also agree that planning considerations such as suds ponds and the design of houses, actually as being illustrated by the member for Carlisle over there, need to be taken into account when new developments are being built, and also financial contributions, because far too often flood alleviation schemes which are developed are not developed at speed to deal with the amount of development that is coming down the line, and that then impacts not only settlements further downstream, but also agricultural businesses. And therefore, when you are looking at flood alleviation schemes, it is right that those schemes are attractive enough for a landowner to enter into such an arrangement, and therefore the remuneration that is associated with those flood alleviation schemes need to be properly addressed. The Environment Agency internal drainage boards and land managers was all those discussed. And what we'd very strongly advocate from this side of the House is loosening up of that relationship between the Environment Agency, our IDBs, who do a fantastic job, and that's been recognised by many in this room, and the relationship with land managers, who sometimes just want to get on and clean those ditches where, unfortunately, they get penalised for doing so at the moment. And as the Minister, I'm sure, will be aware, that the advice that's coming up to her sometimes from officials within the Environment Agency is do not dredge, do not remove that vegetation from those EA managed assets, and I would advocate to her to push back on that advice and say actually dredging is an option further downstream, and removing the vegetation from EA assets certainly should be a consideration on the table. And I'd also like to address the issue of insurance, because that is vitally important, as was mentioned by one of the my honourable member over there. It needs to be considered when we're looking. sorry, I couldn't quite get the name. Sorry. But flood re is incredibly important to be able to be looked at if we're being able to provide that reassurance going forward for those developments that have been built after the date in which it kicks in. So to summarise quickly, it's a vitally important subject, and we'd advocate to the government to go stronger, faster with the recommendations that have been made from the floor of this debate.
Before I call the Minister, could I remind her to keep a couple of minutes for the member in charge to wind up?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to thank all the honourable members who've contributed to this debate, and especially the honourable member for Mid-Norfolk for calling this debate and providing an opportunity for us to hear and discuss how the planning system can best manage and mitigate against flood risk. Now, I'm delighted to be here, obviously, as the DEFRA Minister, though I recognise some of the points from, raised in terms of amendments to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. So apologies if I can't speak to amendments on a different brief, but I will, of course, make sure that any points raised are heard by the relevant Minister. I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for West Hampstead and Highgate, for raising surface water flooding, my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, and the honourable friend for South West Norfolk talks about IDBs, and I will address that. The honourable friend for Stockport talking about flooding and insurance, raising important points. The honourable friend for Shrewsbury about flood action groups, and just actually take a moment to say thank you to all the flood action groups, all the wardens, all the volunteers that go out there in the communities up and down our country for the work that they do. And quite helpfully, my honourable friend addressed some of the concerns and questions around maps. So she saved a chunk of my speech, which is great, because I haven't got much time in which to speak on it. Though I will talk a little bit further about maps as well. My honourable friend for Reading Central, who when I arrived said, you'll see the same faces as we do in all the debates. But that's good, because it shows what a tireless champion he is, in that, along with my honourable friend for Carlisle, every flooding debate, it wouldn't be the same without you. That's all I can say. So thank you so much for coming here. And my honourable friend for, Stockport as well, for raising their concerns. So I met with the honourable member for Midwest back in April to discuss his proposals, and I have to say it was a really informative and helpful debate, and I think he raises important topics of which I've taken incredibly serious and gone away and sort of had a look at, because as he quite rightly said, climate change is bringing more extreme rainfall, it's rising sea levels, and it is a priority for this government to protect communities from the increased risk of flooding. I'm not sure where my honourable friend, the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats, got the suggestion that we were cutting flooding. That's not the case. We've invested a record £2.65 billion over 2 years for 24-25, 25-26 for the construction of new flood risk schemes and the repair and maintenance of existing ones. Now, returning back to very briefly.
The problem I've made, or the question I'm raising, is that the government has, and the Chancellor has said, there is no commitment beyond the end of this financial year. We don't know whether you're cutting or increasing spending. We want to know, and there are many flood-hit communities who are desperate to hear what the Chancellor's plans are beyond this next financial year.
Yeah. Okay, I take the point. So we've just invested a record amount over 2 years, a record amount, the greatest amount that's ever been invested into flood defences. Of course, any future announcements are part of the spending review, and he's been here a very long time and understands that, I'm sure, very well. But I hope that he can see that it's not just deeds, not words, Madam Speaker, in the fact that we've invested that record amount.
I'd like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk's Flood Partnership. I think that's a great example of the vital role that partnerships have in bringing together all parties with an interest on flood resilience. I think that is a really good model for other people to take away. And for the comments made by the benches opposite about the personal experience of flooding and the impact on mental health and the impact on communities, I think were very well made. It's good again to hear about natural flood management and some of the work that we're doing around those, to alleviate flooding, which is a positive nature way of doing it as well as positive for flood alleviation. I would like to sort of talk a little bit about planning and flood risk, though mindful, of course, that I'm speaking on a slightly different brief other than my own. We're committed to building the homes that the country needs while maintaining the highest levels of flood protection. The National Planning Policy Framework is clear that inappropriate development in areas at risk of flooding should be avoided by directing development away from areas at highest risk. Where development is necessary and where there are no suitable sites available in areas with lower risk of flooding, local planning authorities and developers should ensure development is appropriately flood resilient and resistant. Development must also be safe for its lifetime. That was a point made by honourable members. Should not increase flood risk overall and provide wider sustainable benefits. So the government in MHCLG department published the revised PPF document in December 24, which clarified how the sequential test should be applied to development in areas of flood risk and encouraged the use of sustainable drainage systems in new development. And the government is considering whether further changes are necessary to manage flood risk when we consult on planning reform, including national policy relating to decision-making later this year. And all the contributions made regarding amendments I will make sure are heard by the Minister in the relevant department. We are strongly committed to requiring standardised SUDs in new developments. These should be designed to cope with changing climatic conditions as well as delivering wider water infrastructure benefits, reducing runoff and helping to improve water quality, amenity and biodiversity. It is important to ensure appropriate adoption and maintenance arrangements are in place, which is another point raised. We believe that these outcomes can be achieved through either improving the current planning-led approach using powers now available or commencing Schedule 3 to the Water and Flood Management Act 2010, and a final decision on the way forward will be made in the coming months. And there have been changes, as mentioned, made to the National Planning Policy Framework to support increasing SUDs. The NFP now requires all developments to utilise SUDs where they could have drainage impacts. These systems should be appropriate to the nature and scale of the proposed developments. Now, I'll mention quickly the flood maps because I spoke to the Honourable Member from Mid-Norfolk and we had a small discussion about some of the mapping, and it's called NAFRA 2, and you can go in and have a look, put in your postcode now, and it can show you your flood risk now and your flood risk up to the mid-century as well. Now, it will show you for the streets and for the areas. This information is being collected by the Environment Agency from all of the information around the country. These are really impressive because it's the first time ever we see surface water risk, because before you could only see flood maps that showed you coastal water or river flooding. This is the first time you see surface water flooding, so they're really important maps. And as my honourable friend mentioned, these need to be used by developers, they should be used by local authorities. They're all free, available for anybody to have a look at and to look at that information and to see where there is risk and where there are concerns. Now, I want to mention as well and talk about internal drainage board funding, because that's come up as an important issue raised by a few people. Now, we absolutely recognise the essential work of the IDBs in supporting greater resilience for farmers and rural communities. So I was pleased to announce an additional £16 million boost to the IDB drainage fund in March this year, bringing the total funding that we have announced since being in government to 91 million from the previously allocated 75 million. So they've just had an extra 60 million, as I say, only in March this year. This important investment will enable IDBs to modernise and upgrade assets and waterways to ensure they are fit for the future. And I recognise his point, because when I was in opposition, I went to go and see some of the pumping stations myself, so I can hear what he's saying about some of them are in desperate need of upgrades. So hopefully those IDBs can apply for that £91 million through the IDB organisations to make sure they can get those upgrades needed. And this is the other issue that I know many of you have raised. We're working with MHCLG, the IDB sector and local authorities on a new research project. So this project is looking to review IDB costs and funding, including really importantly, whether any changes are needed to the IDB funding model, because I've absolutely heard the point that some representatives have made about how it feels unfair in some communities to be facing increased council tax because of this. So the review is expected to start this summer and will last around a year, and we'll consider the findings carefully. So through our plan for change, the government will deliver a decade of national renewal and economic growth. We will maintain the highest levels of flood protection while taking decisive action to fix our broken planning system and deliver 1.5 million homes. And I thank everyone for their contributions today.
Freeman, to wind up a minute.
Thank you, Mrs. Hobbs, for guiding us through this afternoon. Can I thank the Minister, the opposition spokesman and the 16, I think it was, colleagues from across the House who've spoken. And the rule of tens in this place normally applies. Those who come in, and many others who would have wanted to, and I think that shows the Minister how much interest there is. I just make 3 brief points. I think this is a serious national problem that can only be solved locally. And the local solution is the key. It's getting worse fast. In Norfolk, in the last 18 months, 1,000 houses have been flooded and 200 have had internal floodwater. This didn't used to happen 5-6 years ago. It's getting bad. And it's costing the county and the country a fortune. This quarter, Q1, 200 million of approved claims, which was up 67 million on the previous quarter. This is getting fast. This is getting a lot worse very fast. So can I urge the Minister, on behalf of all those people who are really nervous out there worrying, I've had one constituent who's taken their own life, they've been so worried about this, to be really bold, really brave, and make sure she strikes a blow for the local communities and the local experts and give them the power and the funding to do what they know how to do best.
The question is that this House is considered flooding and planning developer responsibilities. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The sitting stands adjourned.